Hey guys, today I'm going to show you how to hinge my resin bases since I've had a lot of requests for that. I decided a video would be a lot easier than just trying to take pictures. So here's an example of a cut resin base. I haven't hinged it yet, obviously. To start out with, after you cut it completely apart, I turn it over and I put the lower jaw on top of the rest of the base and line it up exactly where I want. Then I use duct tape to hold it in place. Sometimes I'll hinge it before I cut it apart, but then it doesn't always line up right. Sometimes it can be just a tad bit off, so I like to cut them separate. It's just personal preference. If you're going to put gums on it in the end anyway, it usually ends up lining up the way you want, regardless, but this is just easier for me. So after you do that, the next step is getting your hinges ready. I always do V hinges, and that's what my bases are set up for. I'm not saying that you couldn't try and do straight hinge. It would actually, on the Tiger at least, the realistic Tiger, it looks like it'd work just fine, but V hinges are what I prefer. So these are if you buy hinges from my store, this is what they look like. They're 4 wooden ones. My hinges always come with 2 of the 10/24 3/4 inch screws. Machine screws. They look like that. If I can hold on to them. My goodness. Anyway, so you need 2 of those. Then you need 2 number 10 washers. And you will need 2 10/24 lock nuts. And that keeps it together the entire time you're using the suit. They aren't going to pop off or warp. They're very sturdy and strong. So when I mail these out to you, they come in pieces just like this. It's not assembled. So I've had people contact me later and ask how you put them together. So first thing you do, put the machine screw through one. Then you put a washer on top of that. Then you put the second hinge on there. And then the lock nut goes on top of that. The washer in the middle keeps the motion smooth, so the hinges don't hit each other and restrict movement. And the lock nut is just a lot stronger than a normal nut that you put on the end. If you haven't used it before, if you look close, there's actually a plastic in the middle. And when you screw it on really tight, the screw gets embedded into this so it won't just pop off. And the way I get them to tighten up, this probably isn't the most professional way, but it works well for me. I take pliers and hold the lock nut. Then I take a screwdriver on the other side and just keep twisting it. You want it to be as tight as you can get and still have good movement. If you have it too loose, your hinges will pull apart from each other. This is about right. Let me make it a little loose so you can see what I'm talking about. If it's too loose, you can pull them apart just a little too much. So when it's on the base, that is actually what causes the lower jaw to like skew to one side or the other and not close properly. So if you see someone with hinges that are too loose, sometimes the lower jaw will like scoot off to the right side by 1/2 inch or something, and then it closes crooked and looks weird, and that's what causes that. If you have it too tight, on the other hand, it's not going to move right. It's not going to be very sensitive. So I usually tighten it until it won't move like that. And then I just barely move it back like that to loosen it, and that should be just about right. So it moves really easily, but it won't like flop around if you swing it, so... But it's very easy to move, and there's barely any wiggle when you do that. You can maybe pull it apart that far. So that's good. And you want to do the other one the same way. You can use regular nuts on the end, but in my experience they end up kind of sliding off after a while, and that's just not good. It's hard to get to once you have it on a fursuit with fur all around it. It's just a pain. So once again, screw through the first one, washer in the middle, next hinge, finished with a lock nut. And you can get these at any hardware store. I get mine from Menards or Ace Hardware. Like I said, there's probably a slightly easier way to do this, but this is what I'm used to and it works pretty well. That one's a little loose still. Still a little too loose. And that's pretty good. Okay, so on my bases I recommend gluing them down with hot glue first, and then drilling through them and actually bolting it right to the base. That way there is no way on earth it's going to move or warp. If you just use hot glue or E6000, and there's a lot of pressure on the jaw, it all depends on how heavy your resin base is once you get the jaw set in, the eyes, the tongue, everything else. But if it's a really heavy base and your face is pressed tight against the moving jaw, and there's a lot of pressure on it, the glue can give or stretch, which will cause your hinges to either pop off or be crooked. That's the last thing you want. So I just bolted on from, I've been doing that for about a year now, just to be safe. So when you put this on, the end with the lock nut sticks out more than the other side, so I always have that facing out, because otherwise your face could rub against it when you put it on and off, and that would not be comfortable. So the way you put it on kind of depends on the base. I have my bases set up so one edge is slightly higher than the other. I can never remember what it is, so I just kind of put it on and see which fits best. So in this case, the hinge on top is the lower jaw. So I figure out where I want it. Let's see if my hot glue gun is ready. Yep. So I put plenty of hot glue on there because you want it to stick really well. You don't want it to pop off while you're drilling it. This is the type of drill I use. It works really well. The size bit I use is a 3/16, and I just have this old drill bit set, but it works really well. And you can use any size you want. If you end up wanting to use different size machine screws, obviously you would adjust the bit to match the screw, but for the ones that I send out, 3/16 is what you want to use. And I recommend actually doing this on a workbench somewhere much safer. This I'm just doing for the video. And you probably want to wear safety glasses just to be safe. So, I don't mark it. If you feel safer marking it, then go right ahead. But I try and get, maybe that far away from the edge of the hinge. I want to go right in the middle. You don't want to go too far off and get on the edge of the resin because it'll just break and crack. And that defeats the purpose. So just make your hinge weaker instead of stronger. And go straight down. Make sure your drill's running the right way. I had it going the wrong direction, that's why it wasn't working at first. I always get that backwards on the first try. But, as you can see, puts a hole through it. And it looks like it'll be a nice strong hinge. I just use machine screws again to go through it. I go from the inside out. So, same principle again, you don't want the lock nut to be rubbing against your face, that'd be awful. And I usually cover that with some kind of fabric, either minky or felt, just to, even though your face is going to be far away from it, don't take any chances, make sure everything's lined and comfortable. Don't need a washer for this, obviously, since it's not going to move. And you can either use a lock nut on this one, or you can actually use 2 regular nuts on top of each other. Both are going to be perfectly fine, since this shouldn't be moving. It's just to kind of, you know, keep it in place, keep it more secure. I usually push the screw out, hold on to the lock nut the same way, and then tighten it up. Be careful, if you tighten it too much, you could crack the resin. You just want to make sure both the lock nut and the screw are flush against the resin. You want it snug, but not tight. Not too tight. So, that's what it looks like. I usually use the 3/4 inch screws on this, but sometimes I have thicker areas depending on the base, because on some of my older bases I will actually put epoxy sculpt down before I add the hinge, just to angle it out, just to angle it at a different angle. And sometimes that requires an 1-inch-long screw because the 3/4 isn't long enough to go through and still have a lock nut securely on the end. So it just depends on your project, but that should do it. Just do it all the way around. So you'll have 4 total, and then you will have some nice strong hinges. Even though I haven't bolted all of them yet, I'm going to take it off to show you. Good movement, strong hinge, and they don't stick out too far. And that's how you do it. Hope that helped.